Today's story is Raventown, Part 1, by Aakadh Sharma. This is a confession. After I write this out, I intend to sign this with my blood. My death marks the end of this dark journey that begins and ends in the only hell I have ever known, Raventown. I do not know what I expect after I pull the trigger of the 44 resting on my desk next to my picture of my wife, Anne, and my son, Dale. But I wish more than anything to join them in whatever afterlife comes after death. However, if there is a God, no matter how much I confess, no matter how hard I beg for forgiveness, I still belong in hell. I can already smell the burning coals and sulfur as I write this out, and no matter what happens tonight, hell awaits me. Either the biblical one, or my own personal damnation. I'm sorry, Anne. You had always been in my heart. All that happened was my own fault, but you probably know, which, if you do, gives you all the reason in the world to hate me. And I'm sorry, Dale. You must already know of the monster your father is. I feel Raventown's presence. It chases me, getting closer with every breath I take. It wants me dead. I just pray to God that my soul isn't bound to that godless land after my death, like the spirits of many. Here lies my confession. January. When you have a childhood like I did, darkness follows you around. My blood is criminal, an inheritance from my father. My life began and ended in filth, his hands always dirty with riches tainted with blood and death. His scent always carried with it an unsettling stink, one of sin and corruption. Even looking at his dead body, with his brains smeared over the floor with fragments of his skull scattered around the bathroom, I still got that stink from him. The gun lay ahead of him, and for some reason, everything, the cops trying to comfort me, the metallic taste in the air, my sister sobbing, all of it seemed less important at that moment compared to the gun lying on that bathroom tile. You may raise the children however you could. Their father's criminal stink would never leave them. The nuns raised us to be decent human beings, and to some extent, it helped. But, like I said, our blood is criminal, and it was only a matter of time that it caught up to us. My work as a private investigator wasn't impressive. I didn't have a knack for it, but I guess I was bound to be involved with the darker side of the world anyway. When I say my work wasn't impressive, I mean quite the opposite of impressive. It was the 14th, and I had been spending my time in the place that I frequented the most, the local porn theater. I was a porn addict. I had been ever since Anne passed. I couldn't bring myself to lay with another woman. Anne had been my first and only, and I didn't want to stain her memory with the love for another woman. All love that I was capable of was buried with my family. Even with the broken jaw that the 6'9" Nazi prick had probably given me when he caught me spying on him giving Tina Moss, my employer's wife, the fuck of her life, I went down to the porn theater the first thing, knowing I secured the pictures I needed. It was a matter of time. I got the call, with my employer telling me to fuck off because this slut ran back to him and made him fall over his knees. Surprisingly, on texting him the pictures, he arranged to meet instead of cussing at me or calling me a liar. That's when the first call came. Abby. I stared at the screen for a while. The phone buzzed in my hands. It had been so long that I had almost forgotten that I had a sister. I stared at it too long, perhaps, because the ringing stopped. I couldn't answer it with all of Cindy Delacroix's lesbian action on the screen anyways, and it felt wrong to answer her sitting in this dark and dingy room, smelling of semen and the cheap fragrance of a hooker. The buzzing began again when I was in the car. I hadn't forgotten about her call, I just didn't know what I was supposed to do. But whatever she wanted, she was desperate. Hello? She spoke. Her voice hadn't changed since I last spoke to her, but there was something different about it. Hello? Ed? is this you? She spoke again, with the same shakiness in her sound. Yeah, I said softly. This is Ed. Oh, Ed. I could tell my sister was in tears, but after so long, it felt like speaking to a stranger. Ed, you remember Daisy, right? Right? Yeah, I do. Abby, what's wrong? Oh, God. Ed, she's gone. The cops, they aren't doing shit. Please, Ed, I need your help. I lowered the phone, her cries still coming through, just fainter. Daisy. She was my sister's daughter, my niece. I remember her in the crib, those sparkling blue eyes staring back at me. It had been too long since I last saw her. Was she still the same innocent little babe I had known? God forbid something happened to her. I raised the phone back up to my ear. I'm coming to Raventown, I told her. She sighed in relief. Take care of yourself by then. I'll be there tomorrow, I told her, hanging up the phone to her cries of thanks. Daisy. The only memory I had of her was of her in the crib. Despite her parents both having a history of felonies, she didn't have that stink on her. And of everything that is horrible in this world, I was relieved that there still could be innocence whenever I looked into those eyes of hers. Fuck it. I had to leave now. But I had to meet up with my employer first. I needed the cash. Moss had a nice place. The kind every young guy wearing a suit and a $7 bright pearly white smile desires, working straight and clean, but never get to live in. And Moss, he was no exception. He didn't even try with his facade of clean living. I had heard that the porn business was just a front, with guns and the white powder being his main source of cash. And guys like that usually pay well for secrecy, with either cash or a bullet in the skull. You know something, Eddie? I like you. And that's the only reason I didn't have you beaten to death when I heard about Tina. Would you like a drink? The short and scrawny man named Darren Moss, or as I came to know as my employer, sat next to me setting up 2 glasses. Though rich, he wasn't a particularly charismatic man. Oh, I'm sorry, he said, removing the glasses. You don't drink. I need the cash, Mr. Moss. There's been an emergency. My niece, she's gone missing. I told him, and I could tell that even a man such as this was taken aback by my coldness. I'm sorry, man, he said, motioning one of his men to get me the money. Probably ran off with the boyfriend or something, I hope, I told him. That guy did that to your jaw? He asked. You got his address? That wouldn't be ethical, I said. He, obviously taken aback, motioned his guy, who had the newspaper-wrapped pile of cash in his hands, to stop. That's why I can't tell you that he lives in Carlton Street, 4th house, I finished. And this seemed satisfactory enough for Moss. It wasn't my business what happened to the guy his wife cheated on him with, and I did get paid well, so I didn't have a reason to complain. Have a doctor look at that jaw, or you'd have to give up on eating steak for a while, he said, ending our little business meeting. And your niece. I hope you find her. My journey to Raventown began there. I didn't plan on seeing a doctor. That was far back into my mind. It was Daisy I was thinking about. Even though I barely knew the girl growing up, the thought of her going missing gave me an ache somewhere I couldn't quite put my finger on. I wasn't doing this for my sister. It had been too long since we talked. She had been quite happy with her ex-biker husband, who was an alright guy, but we didn't get along very well. I knew my sister was going to be fine with him because it was this guy who helped her through her addictions, and she, in turn, helped him out of his knack for violence. They were both now living clean, and I was happy for him. The last time I saw both of them was the time my sister brought Daisy into this world. It was almost a blur that day, but after witnessing the people they had become, I distanced myself from them. I wasn't ever going to be like that, and my shadow would be a curse on this family, on little Daisy, like it had been on Anne and Dale. The last contact between us was a card from their new house in Raventown a few years back. I didn't care to reply, and I guess neither did she care for one. On the way, I had to make one stop at the gas station to get myself a porno mag. Cindy De La Croix preyed on my loneliness and sorrow. I had to get a look at Cindy. It would help me keep my sanity and push through the fatigue till Raventown. Her perfect breast, clad poorly by her golden hair, that red smile with the ever so slight gap between her front teeth complemented her smooth and tan skin. She allured me to relieve myself in the dirty gas station bathroom. I took only one other break after that, and that was to get myself an energy drink and some gas for the car to keep driving for the last 6 hours to go. I was too tired to let Cindy into my thoughts again, only thinking about getting to Raventown. Welcome to Raventown. The sign read. It had a few icy hills and trees on it, along with a basket of apples painted directly under the letters. Raventown. The name itself felt ominous. Perhaps it was the association and symbolic significance of ravens through literature and art. Or perhaps the word as a whole felt as if a town inhabited by ravens, like one would imagine a cemetery to be. Walter, instead of my sister, stood on the porch, which set me off after a long and tiring drive. My sister knew how much I couldn't stand him already. He greeted me with a, "Hey," but maybe it was the stress or the fatigue, but I remember Walter's eyebrows raising in concern as I dropped, and the world around me went dark. "Edward?" I heard Anne's voice in the dark, but whoever emerged from the dark was not Anne. Cindy de la Croix smiled at me, and winking before she walked to me with the same flirtatious smile still on her lips. She whispered deep into my heart, her warm lips touching my skin as she spoke. "I know who killed you," she said, still smiling. "Who killed me?" I asked her back. "It's a secret," she winked. "If you don't tell anyone." She began to untie her robe to me, and even though I was physically exhausted, I found the strength to begin to crawl to her. "If I don't tell anyone what?" I asked her back, feeling a throbbing sensation. "If you don't tell anyone, just maybe," her tiny hands undoing my shirt. "Maybe I won't have Daisy," she said, giggling. I awoke, still with the throbbing sensation, and my sister and her husband stood beside me. "Hey, Ed," my sister said, reaching for a hug, which I awkwardly met with some hesitation. "What about Daisy?" Walt asked, crossing his arms. "Walt!" my sister intervened. "You said something in your sleep about Daisy," he finished himself. I gave him a confused glance that he seemed to accept for an answer. I sat upright on the couch Abigail had laid me on, my hands reaching to button my shirt. "Let's have a talk about Daisy. Would you mind getting me some water? Any of you? I would like to get started right away." I spoke, still a little on edge from my dream. Their words minced together as they spoke. It wasn't that they spoke over each other, but my fatigue left me dazed. I couldn't tell who said what, but I registered the information I needed. "She had a boyfriend, didn't she? That Kyle kid? He wasn't good enough for our Daisy. I told you, didn't I, Ab?" "Oh, shut up, Walt. Don't put this on me. My Daisy. If she ran, it's because you were such an unfeeling asshole to her." "Oh, I'm unfeeling. You were the one who let that creep take Daisy into his house. I wouldn't let you turn our daughter into a slut." My sister hit him with a slap across the cheek, silencing him. "Don't you dare, Walter Flanagan, talk about our little girl like that." "Hey, guys, ease it. All this won't help, so for the love of Daisy, put your shit aside and tell me about this boyfriend. Is he missing too?" I intervened. "No," my sister said. "Yes," Walter said. My sister shot him a reluctant look, her teeth sinking into her lower lip, but Walter ignored it. "He went missing for a while around the same time that Daisy did. That motherfuck," my sister cut him off. "He's innocent. He was as devastated as we are, Walter. Being a mother, I can see pain in a child's eyes when it's there." She looked at me. "Kyle broke down crying in class. He's as upset as we are." Walt got up, shaking his head, excusing himself with a beer, and heading out of the house. I heard his motorbike roar as he left, wherever he did. I could have consoled my sister, but I just spared her a glance and took off myself, letting her know that I was going after Kyle. He probably knew something. On the streets of Raventown, I felt like a complete stranger, and even though I was, the feeling of being a stranger felt too off, as if I wasn't even supposed to exist here. I was shot a few glances on the way, which I replied with a wave. People weren't as friendly here as the movies often depict small-town people to be, Instead, they hurried along when they passed me. I introduced myself to a few kids I spotted playing a game of basketball nearby. They had a sickening attitude on them. Nothing a strong backhand couldn't correct, but I needed information, and information I got, which did cost me some cash. Kyle's all fucked up, man, ever since his girl ran on him. He'd probably be at the Chandelier around 9 or 10. Chandelier, how original. But that's where I had to be. I looked at my watch. It was just 7 p.m. At least 2 hours to go if I was to trust these kids. I couldn't go up to his house without a warrant, and a kid whose parent let him go to places like the Chandelier, which I came to know was a clubhouse, they would probably get me kicked out of Raventown. I walked around the road, planning to head to the Chandelier early. I had nothing else to do, and no reason to be here anyways. I heard a car behind me, and as soon as I turned to realize that it was the local sheriff's department, I froze. "Hey, new to this town? Would you like to chat? I could show you around if you'd like," the driver said with a plastered smile. "Oh, no thanks. I'm alright." "Get in the car, sir. I insist. Or my Disneyland tour guide wears out and I detain you for questioning those kids back there." I sighed and walked up to the door, which he leaned over and opened for me. I sat by the passenger seat and his smile now wore off. "What business do you have here with Kyle?" he asked sternly. "Officer, I'm Abigail Flanagan's brother. I just want to ask some questions about Daisy." "Look, I'm sorry for your loss, I truly am, but you have to stay away from Kyle. He has nothing to do, just a few questions, and I was cut off by him once again. Come near my son, and I swear to God, whatever happened to your jaw, I'll make sure to finish the job, alright?" he said sternly. I rubbed my jaw, remembering the pain I had almost forgotten about. I didn't have time to argue, so I opened the door and slammed it behind me, continuing on my way. He pulled up behind me before leaving for one last word. "We're looking for your niece. I'm sorry how I came off, but my son has been under a lot of stress lately. It's best if he isn't reminded of it constantly." I just nodded in agreement, and he went on his way, which I was sure was nowhere in particular. I had to have my head up. I was definitely going to be trailed. The Chandelier was louder than I expected. The music killed my hope of interrogation, and I knew whatever I had to do, it had to be outside, far from all these drunk young people trying to get laid. And for a moment, I considered getting off in the bathroom too, but I was too afraid to let Kyle go. I eventually gave up. The seductive, drunken stares were too much for me, and I paid the bartender a hefty sum to let me know whenever Kyle was around, and a little extra for his silence. After I was done, I was reluctant to walk back outside to the crowd. I wanted to stay here in the safety of Cindy's passion, in those relatively quieter stalls, but I was interrupted by a knock on the door. "Hey man, he's here." I buckled myself only and was met with a tall, clean-shaven and round-faced man who wore long hair glistening back in the bathroom lights. Beside him stood the bartender. "You Kyle?" I asked the man, confused. "Yeah, what the fuck you want to talk about?" he said, inhaling a puff of smoke from a cigarette clutched between his fingers. I shot a glance at the bartender who left the room, announcing that he would return in 5 minutes. "Kyle, you know who I am?" He answered exactly that I expected. "Alright then. Well, I'm Daisy's uncle. You know Daisy, right?" Kyle's expression twisted into one of utter dread and began to choke on the smoke he inhaled. Oh God, Daisy. He began to weep. I suppose he wasn't as old as he looked. He began to lean against the wall. I lent him a hand to help him steady himself, but he continued weeping. "Oh, Daisy, please come back to me." He broke down into sobs. He didn't do it, I could tell. But even if he did know something, I couldn't interrogate him like this. I knelt down to him as he sank to the floor. "Steady yourself. I believe you. You did nothing. But if you know anything that will help me find her, or if you know who took her, you have to tell me, Kyle." He looked up to me and shook his head a weak no and continued sobbing. I reached into my pocket and grabbed the last of the cash I carried, taking out a few bucks and handing them to him. "Get yourself a drink." I met the bartender on my way out, who went in to check on Kyle in the bathroom. I bumped into a lot of people on my way out. I was in a rush to get out. Leaving a person in hysterics is like setting a time bomb. On opening the door to leave the noise behind, I felt the cold embrace of the wind. I was at peace here. The noise was still making my head throb, but it was short-lived. A fist flew into my face from sideways, thankfully missing my jaw and getting me in the nose instead. I tumbled onto the ground and another fist landed on my face. "You son of a bitch, I told you to stay away from my son!" The cop spat in my face. This man's rage was boiling at such a rate, I thought I was going to die here, but he was held back by another man in uniform, probably his partner or a superior who tried to calm him down, eventually restraining him with a set of cuffs. My nose bled down my lips. The cop then approached me, helping me up. "You shouldn't have done that. Fleck's not a bad guy, he's just stressed, you know? I'm sorry, but I'd really appreciate it if you didn't throw a lawsuit at the old man." The younger officer spoke with some charm. I felt my rage ease a bit. "Psycho," I muttered, spitting blood on the ground. The younger man chuckled a little at this and offered me a handshake. "Officer Atwell. Kevin Atwell. I hear you're Miss Flanagan's brother? Well, welcome to Raventown." "What the fuck kind of welcome is this?" I asked, holding my fury. "I'm sorry. Let me buy you a drink tomorrow. I'm on duty right now." "It's all right. Have a nice night," I said and began to walk away dismissively. I felt his gaze on me as I walked away. I was ready for another charge the moment his partner would be let free, with adrenaline pumping into my veins. But a rational part of my mind assured me that that was unlikely. After a few minutes of walking, I watched a car parked on the road. A very familiar car, which on closer look turned out to be my car, with Walt, my brother-in-law, waiting with his arms crossed, clearly trying to conceal his impatience. "Hey, get over here," he said through clasped teeth. "Waiting on me?" I replied sarcastically. "Were you followed?" he asked, reaching to my trunk, opening it to reveal what lay within. My stomach churned and my teeth bit down on my lips. "I'm sorry, I couldn't use the bike. I hope he didn't mind. It's for Daisy," he said, looking into my eyes with a raging fire in his own, yet with a very unsettling indifference. He didn't mean the apology, and what he really did mean was for me to just come along with him. Kyle Fleck, the kid whose father almost beat me to death on having a little talk with his son, lay there, gagged and bound. Blood caked around his lips from what I could tell, and a huge black bruise under his left eye, right on his cheekbone. Kyle's world went dark as the trunk closed on him, his struggle to free himself remaining futile. If I wasn't as worn out as I was at the time, I would have protested. Probably could have even reasoned with Walt to let the kid go, but it didn't happen that way. Sometimes fighting evil, looking for light in the dark, the shadows consume you, and you inevitably become part of the endless pit of sin and filth. We were in the woods. Walt didn't want to take a chance. He didn't fit into this small community in a way, which, I admit, neither did I or my sister for that matter. But something about Walt set him apart from everyone here. I knew a soldier of violence when I saw one, and Walt's, well, he certainly was one. His appearance screamed it at the faces of anyone taking a glance at his face, accessorized with his thick beard and darkened skin, where scars set themselves as badges of vengeance. I think Walt didn't expect my silence while we drove, but he hadn't a care in hell for it. His constant glances at me while he took the wheel were a means of telling me that he didn't indulge in this for some sick pleasure, but rather, it was a necessary evil. You know those movies where people are awoken by a gentle splash of water on their skin? Walt wasn't that gentle. A slap from a rough hand hardened by the years he had behind him now seemed to do the trick. Kyle was awake. His fear was apparent from the moment he opened his eyes. His breath panicked as he realized where he had found himself. These woods, they haunted him for whatever reason, and they did so in such great intensity that the fear of his whereabouts seemed to overshadow his fear of the inevitable torture. "Kyle, look at my face. You know who I am, right?" Walt said to Kyle, gazing deep into the kid's eyes, blazing with anger that had been fueled by the fear of loss. Mr. Flanagan, please." Or rather, that's what I presumed he tried to say through the cloth stuffed into his mouth. "What happened that day? Now you tell me, and you tell me the truth." Walt spoke in a tone that had now started to even frighten me. Walt reached for the cloth and tugged it out. Kyle drooled down his chin, tasting the air, seasoned with a hint of the vegetation around them. Kyle looked around in hesitation and in panic. I averted my gaze awkwardly. I still felt his gaze on me. The fear and helplessness in that stare made me forget Daisy for just a moment, and rather, I thought about getting this kid out of here. Walt, without even a hint of remorse, smacked the boy, to which he let out a choked gasp, followed by sniffling. Fucking look into my eyes when I'm talking to you. I've done this to people who weren't sissy pieces of shit like you and they broke. You too will break, and from what I see, it won't take long. Now, don't push me. Kyle coughed, obviously looking into a place in his mind that he feared. He feared, yet he looked for an answer. In my mind, I kept screaming at him to cough out whatever Walt wanted to listen to and be done with this. But in the end, the fear of that memory broke him, and he began to scream. Walt landed a kick in the boy's gut, then rushed to grab his mouth to shut his cries. Alright, kid, you're fucking done. Done! Walt yelled. Ed, get the case, he told me. What? I didn't know what he meant, but the ideas I had weren't pleasant. Front seat, under it. He spoke with such a calm. It almost seemed like a professional job. He had done this many times. The case clicked open, and Walt pulled out a set of pliers. Kyle began to scream, only to be muffled by Walt's hand. Walt began to work on Kyle's kneecaps first, which I didn't even know people did. He first, with the free hand, tried to locate something in Kyle's knee, which frightened the boy much more than he already had been, so much so that he began to pass out. Walt tried to slap him awake, desperate for more information, yet failing in watching the boy fade into darkness. Walt stood up and turned to look at me. I looked down, now terrified of this man. He walked over to me. I struggled to avert my eyes to find reason to distract myself, only failing to do so. This isn't working. You've got to wait for him to be up, he told me softly, disregarding the body on the ground, walking over it like dirt. Jesus, I said. This is so fucking wrong. I don't give a fuck about wrong. I'm done waiting. I swear to God, this motherfucker has something to do with Daisy. I'm gonna beat it out of his corpse if I have to. He spat at the body, crossing his arms. You can't leave like this. I'm gonna stay here all night if I have to, he continued. If you want to take a piss or something, you better do it now. This is gonna be a long night. I knew what I had to do. I walked away, deep into the woods, clutching behind the trees to do it, far from anyone's gaze. Walt knew that I wouldn't run away from him for the same reason I guess he brought me along. He had probably hoped deep within that I wouldn't let him go too far, and for the boy's sake, I hoped I would do my part. When I was sure I was out of sight, I pulled out my phone. I had 11 missed calls, all from Abby. She probably didn't know about this, but now, it was not the time to think about that, so I opened up my gallery. So, I suppose you couldn't resist me, could you? Cindy said with her seductive wink as she took control of my body. I felt her mount me as I closed my eyes in the numb ecstasy that awaited me, like many times before, the joyless, rough pleasure. I had nothing to wash my hands with, but that was the least of my concerns now. The clarity it gave me enough resolve to reason with Walt and letting the kid go. I would tell him that he fucked us both the moment he took the kid, and now, the least we could do was minimize the damage. To my horror, Walt had brought out a tiny rolling blade, which looked like one of those things you'd find at a pizza place. I had to intervene at that moment. The boy had clearly been reclaimed by consciousness and could see the world again. Walt, no! I yelled, reaching for him before he got to work. Let me try, I said, pushing him aside, not giving him a choice. I looked at the boy, and as much as it hurt to do, I knew that apologizing in comfort would just make this take longer. Tell us, I said, gently placing my hand on the bruised cheekbone, or we leave you alone in these woods after this man here chops your limbs off, I said coldly, trying hard to maintain it, and for some fucking reason, resisting the urge to laugh. I knew my sanity was breaking along with the kids, and perhaps we were to go mad together, but I would hold the door until I had my answers. My phone rang again, and this time, I felt it clearly in my pockets. I handed the phone to Walt, who, without a word, walked away to answer it. Make a sound and you're dead, I told him, which he agreed to. Now, what happened to Daisy? The name made him shake, and then I asked him the same thing several times, emphasizing the name Daisy. Oh, Daisy. Oh God, it's my fault. I let them take her. He finally spoke. We made love in here. It was my idea. We slept, and then... He half yelled, half whispered. His sanity was hanging by a thread. Hey! Walt called out to me. Not now, Walt. I dismissed him. listening to what the kid had to say. Who took her? Ghosts. They were ghosts in the forest. They took her. They pulled her away from me. They danced with their arms, and the kid began to lose control, shaking terribly. The actual severity of the situation just hit me. We were about to break this kid's mind. I raised my hand to calm him down. Daisy's been found, Walt spoke out, and I turned attentively only to be surprised by a hard jab across my already fucked up jaw, sending me to the ground, writhing in pain. Kyle raised a rock from where he sat. They made me watch! They made me see! He roared as he almost smashed my head to the afterlife, only to be cut short by a gunshot. I watched him drop lifeless, his own chest cracking under the rock he lifted, bit of his tissue and blood on the ground beside me. Walt lowered his gun, sheltering it in his pocket. I didn't even know he had been carrying it all along. I was too shocked to say anything, but Walt was calm. I dealt with crime, yes, but murdering a scared kid was something else entirely. It was as if I had been shot right through my soul. Another life lost its light so closely. After Anne and Dale, as a matter of fact, Dale would have been this old about now. Fuck, this is fucked up, Walt said calmly, inspecting the mess. What the fuck do we do, Walt? What the fuck do we do? I yelled at him. Well, calm the fuck down. What the... Oh, this is so fucked up. I was relentless in my guilt of association. It had been me who he had last conversed with, after all, dying with his mind in a dark and evil place, one that made him shudder even worse than being tortured. A place I forced him to open the door to. Jesus, calm down, would you? I know what to do, Walt said, his hand warming up his neck. He leaned to grab the body, picking it up and making me follow. We spent the next hour stuffing the body into the trunk of my car, a way of ensuring that I wouldn't rat on him. I wanted to strangle him, to stuff him in there with the corpse, but deep down, a sick part of me had gratitude for him saving me from getting my head crushed. If we don't show up at the hospital, it wouldn't look right. Well, we need to take the car back home, and as hard as that was to do, I obeyed. He took the drive back home, the urge to laugh, to break into mad tears pushing me to do so. What would my sister, or even Daisy, think about this? By a stroke of luck, my sister wasn't home, and I was grateful for it. We parked the car into the garage and took Walt's chopper to the hospital, with me in the back, desperately chugging down the beer we found in the fridge, fighting the urge to gag. This was our alibi, two drunk men collectively grieving the loss of a loved one. The cold air pressed against my numb skin as we rode. I felt nothing for some reason. The urge to laugh gone, yet the fear of being driven mad still haunting me. I just hoped that it wouldn't show. No matter what, it shouldn't show. God forgive my soul. I killed a child. So young, meeting such a terrible fate. His body still laying in my car, desperate to be found and given a proper burial by his loved ones. Hell has gotten closer to me after I wrote this out. And now, after I have relieved that first agony, I think I have found within me some acceptance for damnation. And if hell is real, it is in Raventown, where there are worse things than any grotesque night terror may conjure up. And by a cruel hand of fate, I would discover them. And they would come to haunt me, such that neither a bullet nor a scalpel may be able to purge my mind. So that, my dear listeners, was Raventown Part 1 by Aakash Sharma. This is Part 1 of 5. I intend to release a part of this story every Sunday this month. So Sunday the 3rd, the 10th, the 17th, the 24th, and then finally the 31st with the finale. This entire series will be covered over the period of this month, and yeah, I think that is going to go really well, because it's a neat series. And the story is really interesting. It's a little different from what I usually do. Some parts of it are a little darker, deeper than I normally do, but that's the story. And honestly, he wrote this really well, and I With a name like Raventown, I partially felt obligated to narrate it, since, Raven. But the other part of that is the story is written in just a way that I absolutely love. Thank you again, Aakadh Sharma, for letting me narrate this. Down in the description, you'll find a link to the story, as well as a link to a page where you can submit a story to me if you have one you want me to read. If you liked the video, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please consider hitting that subscribe button to help this channel grow. I appreciate that more than words could ever say. And finally, if you got something you want to say to me, tell me how you're doing, let me know what you thought of the story, leave me a comment. I would love to hear from you. All that said, friends, I love every one of you, and I hope to see you on the next video, but until then, sleep well.